Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the Institute for the Study of Business Markets, ISBM, webinar this afternoon. I'm glad you've joined us. Our title today is Accelerating Customer Acquisition in Industrial Product Channels. Our speakers today are DeSarbo and Rachael Travis from ZS. John's from San Francisco and Rachel's from Chicago. And I'm Lynn Yanyo, Executive Director of the Institute, and you'll hear my voice moderating. While you all get settled, let me tell you a little bit about what's happening at the Institute before we start our webinar. So first, let me tell you about how you control things with this. Thank you for joining us by your computer. And in order for you to ask questions, you'll look at the bottom of your screen. You'll see a navigation bar and a little folder that has a Q on it. That's your Q&A entry. So if you click on that, you'll get a place to type in a question. I'm able to see your questions as you type them in, and I encourage you to type your questions in as you think of them. We're going to hold the questions till the end of the presentation, and then I'll deliver those questions in an order that makes sense to our speakers. Everyone always wants to know this, so we'll just tell you up front that yes, the handouts and the recording from this webinar will be sent to you if you registered. If you're an ISBM member, you can access this forever in B2B Pulse at isbm.org. And if you don't know how to get into that, please contact Lori or myself afterward, and we'll help make sure you get in to access it. B2B Pulse has been getting an upgrade over the holiday, and it'll be back up in about a day or two, but meanwhile, you'll get a link to this regardless. And if you're not a member, well, we hope you would join us, but you'll have access to the recording for 30 days. ISBM is headquartered at Penn State, and have been there for over 30 years. We're a global network of researchers and practitioners in the B2B space. I probably don't need to tell you all that have joined us here that B2B is a large fraction of our economy, but we only have a small number of researchers that are dedicated to advancing this knowledge, and we support them with our membership. We have academics that cover a range of topics, and I'm looking at this list and we'll tell you that Abby Griffin will be with us in March, and I think you'll really enjoy the speakers that we've lined up for you in our meeting in March. And we have over 40 member companies, each of which share their knowledge with each other, as well as learn from the researchers and help direct the future work. Here's an event calendar. You can get a copy of this, but you can also see it at isbm.org. Our next members meeting is March 7th, and we're having it at Penn State, and we're actually going to host this in the business school itself. So it should be an intimate gathering, and I hope you all enjoy being able to see each other and meet directly with the presenters. And then our second members meeting of the year will actually be at MIT up in Boston, Cambridge, in August. We're going to do that jointly with our research fellows, which we've never done, amazingly, for all these years. So we're going to mingle with our researchers during that meeting. We have a jam session coming up in Pittsburgh in February 2nd. That's a local area network event, and the companies in that area kind of talk about the things that are of interest to them in that smaller group. And Gallup will be hosting a jam session for us in June. And then we have our webinar series coming up, and the next one is next month. Okay, so let me please introduce John and Rachel. And John, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Okay, great. Thanks, Lynn. And good morning, good afternoon to folks on the call. We can see where you're coming in from, lots of different time zones. So thanks for taking some time out of your day today. We're going to go for hopefully about the next half hour through a presentation to talk about how we see industrial product companies accelerating customer acquisition. I'll start off. This is John DeSarbo. I am principal with ZS, and I lead our channel strategy and management practice. And a few slides, I'll turn it over to Rachel, and she'll take us through the back end of this presentation. Okay, so just a minute on who ZS is. for those of you who don't know ZSAssociates. We like to say we are the world's largest professional services firm exclusively focused on sales and marketing. And we have a pretty, I guess we're known for our B2B sales and marketing experience, although we're doing more and more work with B2C across industries. So not just industrial products, but we have a lot of clients in the healthcare industry, financial services, high tech, and so forth. And we've had a long relationship with ISBM going back, I think, at least a decade or maybe even two. So we welcome the opportunity to speak to the members in forums like this. Okay, so it's January, and no doubt many of us, if we all looked at our Outlook, our calendars, we would see that we have very similar schedules, I suspect. We're probably in the midst of planning for various kickoff meetings, finalizing goals for the year, setting budgets that were probably supposed to be scheduled or finalized last year. And it's around this time of year that many of our clients come to us with a question, which is really, how do we expedite and increase growth this year? And specifically, what can we do differently? It's an annual event for us to get that question. And about 6 months ago, we knew we were going to be getting to this point, so we decided to dig into this question in the industrial products industry with a number of our clients. So what we decided to do is some research, and we set out, because we know in this industry many of our manufacturer clients actually go to market through distribution. We decided to get the perspective of both manufacturers and distributors on this question. We wanted to identify from their perspective the most significant issues that have inhibited growth, and their suggestions for what needs to be done differently. So we went out and surveyed 100 manufacturers and distributors in the U.S. To get their opinion. You can see the breakdown by industry on this chart. The participants were all senior sales and marketing executives, and they were very candid both in the survey and then follow-up interviews that we conducted with them. So, drum roll, when we spoke to the manufacturers, the three biggest issues, and I'm sure for many of you on the call this is not surprising, the three that were reported back to us as the biggest issues that manufacturers feel like they're facing as they're thinking about growing revenue. It's pricing pressure, acquiring new customers, and in upselling. Those are the three that jumped off the top of the list. And then when we asked distributors the same question, the three that popped to the top of the list were acquiring new customers, understanding where the growth opportunities are in the market, and generating qualified leads. So it's interesting when you lay these two perspectives up against each other, it's clear there's this one issue. How do we acquire new customers that is deemed to be a most significant issue for both manufacturers and the distributors. So when we saw this in the research, we decided to focus our further analysis on that issue specifically. It's a common challenge, and it's something that I'm sure, looking at the companies represented on this call, we're all thinking about. How do we get new customers in addition to building them the relationships we already have? Okay. So if we move forward, the other questions we asked in the survey, and there's going to be a white paper available that provides even more of the survey findings, but was not just what the major issue was, but we got the manufacturer distributor's perspective on how well they think they're addressing that issue through the support that's provided from manufacturers to distributors. And what we found is that manufacturers are very pessimistic about their ability to address this top challenge. If you look at this chart, high-level finding, but less than 1/3 of the manufacturers that we surveyed felt that the support that they're providing to distributors to help them drive customer acquisition was effective or having an impact. So, you know, and more than a third felt that they were having no impact whatsoever. So this, you know, obviously it's a dire finding for many companies, and it's very much consistent with a lot of the anecdotal conversations we've had with our manufacturer clients. Some quotes on the page here, but many manufacturers are questioning whether they should be really investing in this area or not, given the effectiveness. Questions we typically get is, you know, what are we exactly getting for all of the investment we're making in funds that are available to support distributor marketing? You know, why do we keep building all this material for our distributors and, you know, not seeing it actually generate any impact? And, you know, why is it that we keep selling the same products to the same buyers in the same accounts year after year? So general level of frustration. Folks have been trying to tackle this problem for years, and it just doesn't seem to be clicking. So with that frustration, we've thought about that, and we think there are a number of companies that are stuck in what we're calling this vicious cycle, right? So if you're starting at 11 o'clock here, you know, there is this frustration with not having enough new customers or new logo opportunities. This drives an over-reliance on the existing customer base. Often in many cases, there's increased price competition within those accounts, which leads to lower profit margins, frustrations with the distributors as a result, so that reduces their mind share and loyalty, which leads to lost market share, missed growth targets, and then a decision to reduce the investment in marketing, which then feeds this problem of not actually growing the account base. So there's this cycle that if you can imagine spinning clockwise here, many companies seem to be caught on. And we've pushed ourselves over the last couple months just to think about what can you do to break out of this cycle. And some additional insights from the data kind of pointed us in a direction that we're going to talk about in the back end of this conversation. One is it's interesting that distributors are actually more positive about the support they're getting from manufacturers to help them drive customer acquisition. So if you remember the chart we showed a few back, there was only a third or less that felt that there was that they were being effective. The manufacturer support was effective in driving customer acquisition. In this case, it's half or slightly more, and really only 12% of the distributors we felt that the support they're getting was not effective at all. So there's a bit of a disconnect here. Both the distributors and manufacturers agree that new customer acquisition is a problem, but they differ in their perspective as to how the support that's provided is actually addressing that challenge. And the conclusion we've reached here is that distributors kind of just want more help, right? They feel like with more help from the manufacturers, they could be making progress. Of course, the manufacturers feel like they're not getting enough return on that. So the question is really, how do we get more bang for the buck when it comes to distributor marketing support? So that's one question we're going to get into. To get into the answer to that question, I'll leave you with one thought before handing this over to Rachel. When we dug into this question of what really is effective when it comes to marketing for support with both manufacturers and distributors in interviews, what we found is that there seems to be this, again, another disconnect where manufacturers and distributors, while they agree that there's a challenge here, they're coming at the challenge from different perspectives or different angles. In general, many manufacturers seem to be very focused on the bottom of the sales funnel. So, graphic I'm sure we're all familiar with in the middle. If you think about a potential customer becoming a prospect, eventually a qualified lead, leading to a sales opportunity that's then closed to become a new customer that you can later grow through cross-selling and upselling. That's what we're representing in the middle of this. The manufacturers, when they look at investment, they tend to focus on the bottom of this. So they're seeking distributors who once there is an opportunity, are able to sell value. If you remember, one of the challenges that they highlighted was this price competition issue. So they're looking for distributors that can break out of that competition, that competitive environment, and sell their value. They're looking to invest in the enablement tools for those distributors, and they're focused on distributors that are able to provide a quality customer experience once they they do purchase. So there seems to be more weight on the bottom of this funnel from their perspective, while the distributors talk about their needs and what they're trying to do being more focused on the top of the funnel. So they're requesting assistance to identify the best market opportunities. Tell me where to sell your product, right? Looking for help to reach new customers and new buyers while simultaneously defending their current accounts. And of course, they're asking for more and higher quality leads with new prospects. So probably a simplistic way of saying it, seems like the manufacturers are focusing more on sales enablement support, while the distributors are looking for more upstream marketing support. And of course, neither type of support alone is sufficient. It's about actually addressing this entire funnel. So that's what we want to talk about for the balance of this webinar. And I'll turn it over to Rachel now, who's one of the leaders of our marketing practice. Once we got to this point and we saw that there's this need to really dig into how to provide effective marketing support to distributors to enable new customer acquisition, we pulled in Rachel, who works with a number of our clients on this issue, and Rachel's going to talk about what you do about this problem.
Great, thanks, John. So as John mentioned, to overcome this cycle, this vicious cycle that both distributors and manufacturers appear to be caught in, there's three things that manufacturers must do. And I'll go into each of these in much more detail in the following slides. But the first one is, you need to work with your distributors collaboratively to develop and define your growth strategy and help them define their growth strategy as well. The other one is, how do you differentiate the support that you're providing to your distributors based on their capabilities and their opportunities? And then the last one is looking at, how do you enable distributors to communicate and sell, communicate value and sell customer outcomes rather than competing on price. So I'll go into each of these in more detail now. The first one, again, is around the growth strategy. And again, defining your growth strategy is really around, articulating your goals and how you're ultimately going to achieve those goals. And you do that by defining not only where you're going to play, but then how you're going to win. And as a manufacturer, you need to do this obviously for your own business and understand, for where you want to play, what type of distributors or channel partners you need to be effective going after those opportunities. But you also need to work with your distributors to do this for their businesses as well, and make sure that it aligns to your strategy and where you want them to focus on in the market. So in order to do that, you need to take one step deeper and actually be able to understand the different market segments. And so defining that where to play is the critical next step in defining your growth strategy. And so again, you need to, as a manufacturer, be able to clearly articulate, what market segments you're interested in, and then be able to communicate what your strategy is for each of those different segments, and recognize that different segments may have different strategies that align to different types of distributors, and then what that means for the growth strategy for your distributors. So beyond a market segmentation and understanding, at that high level of market segment, to really make it actionable, you really need to move beyond that market level view and get down into a customer or account level understanding. And so this is where what ZS calls potentialization comes into play. And what this is a bottoms-up analytical approach to estimating the revenue potential or opportunity at an account level. And we do this by looking at like accounts or clusters of like accounts, and setting a performance threshold to then project potential across all accounts within that cluster. And I know I just flew through a highly complex process, but we'd be happy to talk through that in more detail if you're interested. So then once you have that detailed level of understanding at the account level, again, what that enables you to do is, again, get very tactical and granular in defining specific opportunity types and then action plans against those opportunities. And so once you have an understanding at that granular level, it enables you to inform, where you're going to make investments in sales and marketing efforts. Where are you going to target versus not? Where are you going to have, where do you want your distributors to target and how? And also enable you to define, very specific engagement tactics to go after those different targets. And this is just an example of different types of opportunity and how you would go about approaching those given the objective for that growth opportunity. So the next one was around how do you differentiate the support that you provide to your distributors. And in order to do that, you need to be able to segment your partners. And from our experience doing this, we really see best-in-class organizations segmenting their partners based on two dimensions. The first dimension is based on their growth potential, and the next dimension is based around what their current capabilities are. And in a perfect world, all of our partners would fall in the top right quadrant here, where we just invest because we know that we will get good returns on that investment. But in reality, you typically see there's partners that have high growth potential, but just don't have the sales and marketing capabilities required to really be able to capitalize on that. So for those types of partners, it's really around, as a manufacturer, how do you better support and enable and enhance their capabilities to get them more towards that top right quadrant. And then kind of conversely to that, you have those partners who have very strong capabilities, but maybe just aren't focusing them in the right areas, or just don't have the scale to go after as much of the opportunity. And so it's how do you then help them understand the market opportunities better to guide them and ultimately get them to deploy their strong capabilities against the best opportunities. And then obviously oftentimes you have those that are low capability and low growth potential, and unfortunately we see that being a drain on resources for manufacturers all too often. Okay, so then the next step that manufacturers need to take is around enabling their distributors, again, to communicate and sell the value of their solutions. And this is a challenge around perceived versus actual value, and how do you avoid getting into this scenario of wasted value creation where customers don't see the value and see it as just an expensive add-on, or ultimately your distributors just give it away to the customer because they can't get them to actually pay for it. And so to avoid that cycle and of wasted value creation, there's really three different approaches that we've seen some strong companies provide to their distributors to help with this issue. And all three of these really focus around one key thing, which is being able to tailor and communicate the value specific to a individual customer's needs and the outcome that they're trying to drive. So the first one is just, again, a value canvas, and this is, again, really focusing on customer needs and what their outcomes that they're trying to achieve, and being able to have evidence that is credible to that given customer. And then obviously anytime that you can provide a case study that is relevant to that specific customer need. You know, there's value in that. And then also being able to have, you know, the number side of things, and being able to quickly tailor a calculator to show the ROI or the total cost of ownership for your given product or solution. Oftentimes it is a valuable tool that can overcome the initial investment or initial price conversation. So again, just to wrap up the three steps that you know you need to take to get out of this vicious cycle. You know, again, it's defining and aligning on mutual growth strategies. So you as manufacturers need to understand growth strategies, and then how each of your individual distributors fits into that growth strategy, and make sure that they're aligned and understand that as well. Being able to segment your distributors, again, based on their capabilities and opportunities, and then providing the necessary tools to enable them to communicate their value to customers. Okay?
Great. So we'll open it up to some questions in a minute, but maybe a final thought. I think we just shared a lot of information, and again, the intention is to provide this document, this webinar, as a resource to go back and maybe look at some of the details that we covered. But essentially, we're advocating again that the manufacturers and distributors, first of all, jointly align on a mutual growth strategy, and then the manufacturers treat distributors differently based on their capabilities, and then provide tools that enable the distributors to communicate their value, not just the benefits of a particular product or service sold through the channel. So that's kind of the big three things. Now, obviously, a lot of that is easier said than done. So some additional questions to ponder, as we kick off the year, and these are areas where we're going to be doing some additional digging and research, are the following here on this page. So first of all, we're advocating this joint strategy and plan. Well, that's obviously dependent upon the manufacturer knowing where the growth opportunities are in the marketplace. So that's the first question is, as a manufacturer, do you know where you should be pointing distributors to before actually engaging them in that planning process and segmentation that Rachel went through. We're advocating that you provide support to distributors in a different way. If manufacturers are focusing more on the bottom of the sales funnel, and we're suggesting they need to provide top of the funnel, more marketing strategy type of support, well, then there's an obvious question, which is, in your channel or distributor management team, your marketing and sales function, do you have the resources you need to provide that support? So, an unfortunate consequence of budget cuts in recent years is that we see a lot of very thinly staffed channel marketing and sales organizations, and diminished talent. Unfortunately, a lot of those functions have become more administrative as opposed to more strategic. So that's a question of before reaching out to distributors and supporting them this way, do you have the ability to do that? We're advocating, some of what Rachel walked through from an analytical standpoint is pretty sophisticated. Being able to build that waterfall chart, showing a revenue plan, segmenting partners based on their capabilities. That's all dependent upon having the data from your distributors that gives you insights into some of that, some of the opportunity, and then the analytical capability to actually use that information. So that's something to think about as you build your teams. Do you have that data science capability, the analytical capability to provide that type of engagement with distributors? The fourth point here is, it's kind of this the saying, you can bring a horse to water, but you can't make him drink, right? So before or in concert of thinking about how to better support distributors, it's important to think about whether the incentives are in place to drive the right product behaviors. In many cases, manufacturers are going to need their distributors to invest in their own growth capabilities. Are the incentives that are in place sufficiently rewarding partners who choose to do that? And then lastly, this idea of manufacturers and distributors collaborating in new ways, that requires investments on both sides, and manufacturers need to think about whether there's the condition for that collaboration. So is there sufficient mind share among the distributors to garner their support in this new way of collaborating? Is the value proposition you're offering to the channel strong enough to win their hearts and minds, so to speak? So just some additional questions. I mentioned these are areas where we're going to dig in a little bit more in the next year. But with that, we're about a half an hour in, which is where we were shooting to be. Lynn, I guess if there are any questions that came across, you want to throw them out, we could choose to we can answer them.
Great. So thank you so much. I'll answer one that I typed out before, which is yes, the slides and the recorded presentation will be available to you. You'll be sent a link with that information after the webinar is over. So, so take care. You didn't have to try and write everything down as it went by. We had our first question was, could you go into a little bit more around the segmentation approach? We understand size, but like what would be some examples of a way you might segment your distributors, and how do you think about it, or can you give us some examples that you've seen?
Yeah, so this is an interesting one because in a number of sectors, I think that the predominant or sort of traditional way of thinking about distributors has been to think about their value being mostly driven by logistics in inventory management capabilities, right? So people like to think of a distributor as a bank in a barn and a truck, right? They hold inventory, they ship inventory, they maybe provide financing. But when it comes to driving customer acquisition, the capabilities that distributors and other channel partners really need to have are more sales and marketing. So we have seen some of the industry leaders start to think about segmenting their distributors not just based on, say, past performance or their operational capabilities, but also based on their sales and marketing capabilities. And the way they do that is, understanding how large of a sales organization your distributor has, understanding the marketing capabilities that they have, people as well as technology. A lot of that is accomplished by gathering information directly from distributors, but we've seen a number of, I guess, some of the more sophisticated companies actually going out and doing things like gathering information from distributor websites and their social media to assess their digital marketing demand creation capabilities. So, this is all about, I guess, gathering additional information on your distributor sales and marketing capabilities to add to the profile that you already have. And again, some of that is gathered directly from those partners, and others are gathered by just looking at what they're doing from a digital marketing perspective.
Yeah, and I think the reason why the other reason why we're seeing this becoming more prominent is, again, the desire to become more intimate with customers and understanding customers' buying preferences and ultimately what they're expecting from the distribution partner versus the actual manufacturer, and being able to understand what those customer needs and expectations are, and knowing what capabilities are required from a distributor's perspective to be able to meet those needs and expectations from the customer. You're going to find customers of all different types, and we're seeing, it's becoming a little bit of a polar. You get the customers that do want to form more of that strategic partnership, and that requires a very different type of distributor to be able to serve those customer types. And then you're going to see those customers that are much more transactional and just want to buy on price. And obviously that requires a different skill set and different distributor to be able to be successful in those types of scenarios. And so that's also what's driving a lot of the need to segment beyond just the operational capabilities, as John mentioned.
Yeah, and I guess maybe another real practical point here is this is an area where we see the industrial product companies following high-tech and financial services companies. I think it's fairly commonplace in the industrial products area for there to be a process by which distributors are authorized to sell and distribute a particular product. And so there's a program in place that provides that access to the product through some sort of certification or process. In the high-tech and financial services industry over the last, say, 5 years or so, in addition to assessing partners' technical capabilities, many companies have introduced as part of their programs, certification on sales and marketing capabilities. And so that's, where you're actually looking at partners demonstrating or requiring partners to demonstrate those capabilities in order to obtain certain types of support and incentives. That's more of the what we're seeing. It's the expansion of distributor programs to include that type of an assessment.
So we've had a question. Could you put the deck back on slide 31? And we didn't have a question, so if we could just maybe leave it on 31 and folks can take a look at that for a little bit beforehand. So I think you're on 33, so going back 2 slides.
Go back 2 slides. Yeah. This one?
That one says 30 to me, so I'm not sure.
Or this one?
And so the person who answered this, I won't out you, but if this is not the one, just type me a note and we'll change it. And meanwhile, I'll go on to the next question. An attendee has asked, there's an ingredient distributor that they use that sells thousands of ingredients, and their ingredients are only a fraction. So they're just a small player in all of the things that distributor carries. What distributor models work well to address this? I'm guessing like you need to get their attention, and you seem like you're small pickings to them. And if distributors specialize internally with product managers, does this work any better? Is there hope there? Do you have some thoughts?
Lynn, could you ask the second part of it again? I think we got the first part, but what was the second question?
The third part is, how do we get more distributor mind share when we're only one of their items to sell? And the second is, if distributors specialize internally with their own product managers, does this work better or not?
Got it. So for the first one, so this is a really key point. So I'm glad someone asked this question, because because we see a number of our clients struggling with this, because the way that many industrial product companies, and actually it's not just in that industry, but other industries as well, have thought about their value proposition to their channel partners. It's oftentimes really focused on the discount or rebate that's earned selling a product, and if it's sort of the financial benefit of selling that particular product. And when the product you sell is a small portion of the broader portfolio, or it's a small transaction, this creates this problem around one of the things I brought up, which was the importance of garnering mind share in order to drive this collaboration. So the key thing here is, if you're an ingredient company or a company that's selling a product which is at a relatively low price point relative to what's being sold by the distributors, to think about it from sort of a solutions marketing perspective, and thinking about the distributor's business and understanding what your product enables them to sell beyond your product, right? So how is your product, your ingredient, or what have you, sold as a bundle or a basket of other products, number one. So you start to point them to your ability to enable them to sell larger, items, I guess, and the importance of driving, and/or the importance of driving, or your ability to drive stickiness with their customers. So what you have to sell is actually very important to the end customer, even though it doesn't maybe represent a large portion of their income. Then you can point to those benefits. So thinking about enabling distributors to sell solutions and to build sticky customer relationships as a result of selling your product along with other products. That's, I think, the key objective. Now, the second question is, if you're running into an issue where your distributors actually have a product marketing organization, which is aligned to very discrete, I guess, siloed product groups, how does this work? I think that does create this additional complexity. If you're an ingredient company and you need to essentially build mind share amongst multiple product managers, that makes it a little bit more complicated from a collaboration perspective. I'm trying to think of what we've seen work in that area. I think we've seen some of the more sophisticated channel managers do is to, first of all, establish a cadence of planning, planning and review, business review sessions. So meeting quarterly or twice a year with their distributors, and then including in those discussions multiple product managers as well as representatives from other functions. It's trying to sort of broaden your importance to the entire business and not getting sort of pigeonholed within one product sector. It's obviously it's easier said than done, and understand the challenge, but I think those are the objectives that I would be seeking.
Great. Please ask further on questions if you have any more, but I think that was very helpful. I think that's always the challenge for thinking about distribution from my perspective too, is, we sell things, and distributors, if they're very successful, are carrying lots and lots of products, and I really need to figure out how to get their attention, and price seems to be an easy way to get there, but if you can somehow quantify other things, have you seen folks being able to use metrics to be able to show how retention of customers has been affected, say, by your product being sold by that distributor? Have you seen that that data being able to be generated?
Yeah, it's I think when Rachel talked about some of the analytics and kind of end customer segmentation work that's being done, that's really what I guess it's companies that are able to do that well that seem to have licked this problem. They have a lot of, first of all, information from their end customers that enables visibility to their total spend in a category broadly defined, and then they understand how their products actually impact their distributors' profitability. And so that, again, requires a lot of data from both the end customers and the distributors. So the companies that seem to be better at this are those that have put in place processes as well as incentives to gather information from the distributors, and those tend to be the bigger manufacturers that have the power in order to command that. And sometimes that varies by country. We have a couple clients that, for whatever reason, are able to get a lot of that information in Canada, but they can't in the U.S. So yes, I think it is possible. It's again, it's not easy, and a lot of what we're talking about now and these questions are some of the most sophisticated challenges. I think what I would say is to start to kind of walk before running, and at least try to address the three recommendations that Rachel covered, as a way to build some of the more sophisticated capabilities.
We have one more question, and please again type more if you think of something at the end here. But I think this is a general question. If you could help us understand how these best-in-class manufacturing companies that best manage their distribution channel, how do they engage with their distributors to understand how the distributor should deliver value through the customer buying journey? It's the distributor role to have that interface. How do they engage with each other? Can you give us a few examples or suggestions on how one can get into those shoes and do that?
Yeah, so try to be as tactical as possible here. But I think one is, first of all, declaring this as a topic of discussion, right? So I think what we see, that some of the more sophisticated channel managers do in their annual distributor conference, or even in just communications, is it's a declaration that we need to focus on jointly improving our end customers' experience. And to do that, we need to be very open about how we collectively enable that experience. So one is just signaling the intent to collaborate in that way. And then the second is to actually set up a process by which you're doing some of that joint planning and exchanging of information. And the best ways we've seen people do this is to have two types of meetings during the course of the year. One is, an annual business review where, once a year, usually at the end of the year or around now, you sit down with your top distributors and you say, okay, let's talk about how we did in the eyes of the end customer. It's helpful to have, information from the customers, voice of customer information to look at how they view their experience in the role that the manufacturer and the distributor play. But have a meeting where this is an explicit topic of conversation in the context of setting goals for the year, right? That's one type of meeting once a year. And then the second is to put in place quarterly business reviews where you're not just reviewing financial information, right? How many, what are our sales, where are we according to different financial metrics, but you revisit your goals in providing a particular experience to end customers and any evidence as to whether you are doing that effectively or not. So that oftentimes, comes from research that's done throughout the year to get the voice of the end customer on how well they feel they're being served. That could be a survey, could be, focus group discussions or what have you. But it's I guess maybe to summarize real quickly, it's about actually A, saying this is something we're going to work on together. B, being clear on how you're going to do that. What are the meetings in which we're going to discuss that challenge? And then C, having information from the end customers that gives you their perspective that feeds into those meetings.
Great. So when I listen to all of these great best practices, and then I remember my reality as in having distributors and having many of them and all of them feeling like they had their own individual challenges. Is there a guidance on the amount of staff that the manufacturing company ought to have to coordinate best the distributors in the beginning, of course, when you're setting this network up, and of course later when things are running well, you might need less. But what kind of staffing ratios or spend do you have? Do you have a rule of thumb?
Trying to think. It's kind of all over the map, but here's how I would think about it. First of all, those of you who are managing channels, you understand the fact that business is concentrated in a relatively few number of distributors. Everybody's dealing with the worse than 80-20 rule, right? So it's first important to segment partners in two ways. One, how important they are to your business. So how much revenue is driven by the distributor or profitability is driven by the distributor. How do you think about it from that perspective? And then also take this other perspective around their capabilities. The more sophisticated partners, the less sophisticated partners, and so forth. So the first step is you have a segmentation that, let's say, breaks your partners into three groups, gold, silver, bronze, right? Then you assign staffing ratios to those segments differently. So, it's going to vary obviously based on the distributor base, but what we'll typically see is companies will have at that top of the funnel, top of the pyramid, whatever gold partners that segmented it as I discussed, you could have a ratio of 1-to-1 or greater, right? I've seen some companies have a team of 3 to 5 people supporting one distributor if that distributor is that important. But usually there's kind of this key account management approach where you have one person aligned to an individual distributor or maybe a couple distributors. And that ratio varies pretty significantly as you move down the tiers to the point where you may have a ratio of 1 to 50 to 60 at the bottom. So I think I would come up with the ratios that your staffing model aligned to a segmentation, and then what those ratios are going to vary, not just by industry, but by by how many partners you actually have in each of those segments. I don't know, Rachel, any other thoughts on that?
Yeah, no, I think ratios is a dangerous game to play given everything that John just mentioned. I think it's a matter of looking at the relationship and the value and figuring out what's sustainable as far as what level of support you can provide to those different segments of distributors.
But we'll see some pretty extreme, when I spoke about staffing challenges earlier, I mean, we all have clients that generate, $1 billion+ through a distributor channel made up of, let's say, 100 to 150 distributors, and they have 2 people in marketing. So you do that, and it's just you're not able to really provide the kind of support that we're talking about.
Yeah, I think that I'm familiar with seeing many companies think that having distributors means that they don't need to have very much staff. Right? That's a way of making it less expensive from their end. They're going to put this back on the distributors. But as you wonderfully summarized, without a strategy for your distributors, they're going to do whatever they're going to do then, or nothing, to help you. And my experience too is if it's hard to sell your product as a distributor, they focus on somebody else's product to sell. So it's really important. Yeah. Fascinating. Let me just make an open call since we have a couple more minutes yet. If anyone else would like to ask another question, the line's still open. And if not, boy, this was really fascinating. Thank you, John and Rachel. Your contact information is there. So if you would like to personally ask them a question, I'm just going to generally say I'm sure that they would welcome an email to ask further questions or learn more about ZS. And you will all receive an email after this that shows where you can get the recording and the slide deck. And if there's any more things we can do for you from ISBM, please do reach out, and thank you. So thank you, John. Thank you, Rachel, very much.
Thank you, Lynn. Appreciate it. And thanks to those that hung out with us. And good luck as you ramp up in the new year.
Thank you. Thank you. All right, good. Let me just remind you, our next webinar is in February. You'll be seeing something to sign up for that. And I do hope that you'll join us for our members meeting in March 7th and 8th. It's a cozy environment, and we'd like to make sure we have seats for everyone. So if you'll go to isbm.org and register if you can come, that'll help us with our planning. Thanks so much. And thank you again, John and Rachel. Bye-bye, everyone.